The morning he left was so ordinary. The sun was coming through the kitchen window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. I made coffee the way I always do. He was packing his carry-on, the same black suitcase he always took. He kissed me goodbye at the door. A familiar warm pressure. He said he loved me. He said he'd call. As soon as he landed, I remember watching his car pull out of the driveway. And I remember this feeling, just a tiny cold knot in my stomach. I told myself it was just the usual. Missing him, I told myself it was nothing. My breath caught. This was it. This was the moment I could let it go to voicemail. I could silence it. But the ringing felt accusatory, a demand for an answer. My fingers shaking swiped across the screen. To answer, I brought the phone to my ear. The house felt different in the days before he left. It wasn't anything I could point to, not a specific sound, or a change in the light. It was a feeling, a pressure in the air, like the moments before a thunderstorm breaks. Mark was careful, too careful. He'd always been a tidy man. But this was different. This was a kind of surgical precision in the way he moved through our home, a quiet intensity that made the space feel smaller. It started with the little things. I'd mention that I couldn't find my favorite pen, the one I always kept on the kitchen counter. You probably just misplaced it, he'd say, not even looking up from his laptop. You're always losing things, Sarah. And an hour later the pen would be back on the counter, exactly where I always left it. I'd question. It'd say, I swear it was there. Before he'd give me that look, a mixture of pity and mild annoyance. You've been under a lot of stress lately. Your mind is playing tricks on you. You're getting paranoid. Paranoid. He used that word a lot. It became his favorite weapon. I'd hear a faint, unfamiliar ringtone from his study late at night. When I'd ask about it, he'd frown and say the television was on in the other room, or maybe it was your phone. You're hearing things now. He said it with such calm authority, such genuine concern, that I'd immediately doubt myself. Maybe I was stressed, maybe I was imagining it. The doubt was a seed he planted, and he watered it meticulously every day. The morning of his departure, he was a portrait of normalcy. He packed his suitcase with efficient movements, folding his suits with a practiced hand. He kissed me on the forehead. It's just a 3-day conference in Chicago. I'll be back before you know it. But his eyes, they didn't quite meet mine. They scanned the room, the hallway, as if he were checking for dust, for any trace of himself he might have left behind when the front door closed behind him. The silence that settled over the house was immense. It should have been relief. Instead, it felt like the beginning of a test. I hadn't studied for the feeling of being watched. Didn't leave with him. If anything, it intensified. It was as if the house itself was his proxy, judging my every move, waiting for me to fail. For the first day, I tried to be normal. I cleaned the already clean kitchen. I answered emails. But the silence was a vacuum, and my mind kept circling back to the little inconsistencies. The gaslighting had done its job. I was teetering on the edge, unsure if what I felt was intuition or insanity. I decided to clean his study, something I rarely did. It was his private space, and I'd always respected that, but now the closed door felt like a challenge. The room was sterile, almost impersonal. Everything was in its place. But as I dusted his desk, my hand brushed against the back of the center drawer. It was locked. I'd never noticed that before. Why would a drawer in his home office be locked? My heart started a dull, heavy rhythm. I searched for a key, knowing I wouldn't find one. He was too careful for that. Then, as I was vacuuming the rug, the nozzle caught on something under his leather chair. I reached down and pulled out a single small silver earring. It was a simple stud, elegant. It wasn't mine. I never wear silver. I held it in my palm. This cold, hard piece of evidence. My first thought was the one he had trained me to have. There must be an explanation. Maybe it belonged to a colleague who visited. Maybe it was old from a party years ago. But the excuses felt hollow. This was a deliberate clue left behind, either by accident or by design. Later, when I got into my car to go to the grocery store, I caught a faint scent. It was a perfume, something floral and light. Not my perfume. I have always worn vanilla. Hi honey, did you land safely? Rolled down the windows, letting the cold air rush in, but the smell seemed to cling to the upholstery, to my clothes. That's when the real descent began. The line between suspicion and paranoia dissolved. I stopped sleeping. I'd pace the house at night, running my fingers over the surfaces, looking for more traces. I'd check his computer history, only to find it meticulously cleared. I became a ghost in my own home, haunting the spaces he had left behind, obsessed with proving that I wasn't crazy. The house, once a place of comfort, became a prison of my own, making every creak of the floorboard a taunt, every shadow a threat. I was drowning in doubt. and the only person who could throw me a lifeline was the one who had pushed me into the water. By the third day I was a raw nerve. The rational part of me was screaming to let it go to wait for him to return and pretend everything was normal. But the other part, the part that felt its reality slipping away, knew. I needed a definitive answer. I needed to prove once. And for all whether I was a betrayed wife or a madwoman, it was a test, a trap I was setting for myself if I called him. And he answered with the familiar sounds of a hotel lobby, a conference hall. Then I was paranoid. I would get help, but if the fabric of his lie had a tear, I had to find it. I waited until evening. The time difference would put him in Chicago, probably at a dinner with clients. My hand was shaking so badly, I could barely press the buttons on the landline phone. I put it on speaker and set it on the kitchen counter. The sterile surface, a witness to my unraveling. The ringback tone sounded impossibly loud in the silent house. One ring, two. On the third ring he answered. Hello. His voice was clear, too clear. There was no background noise, no clattering plates, no murmur of a restaurant, no wind from a city street. Mark, it's me. My own voice sounded thin and reedy. A pause, just a half second too long. Sarah, is everything all right? He sounded guarded, annoyed. I just wanted to hear your voice. It was a pathetic, transparent lie. How's the dinner? The voice was a woman's. It was cheerful, warm, familiar. It was the voice of someone who had a right to ask that question. For a second I was so confused. I couldn't speak. I thought I must have misheard. Maybe it was a colleague, a client. But the tone was all wrong. It was intimate. Another pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head thousands of miles away. Or were they? It's fine, a bit boring to be honest. Listen, can I call you back? We're just about to order. And then I heard it. It was so faint I almost missed it. A sound in the background on his end. Not the sound of a restaurant, it was the distinct high-pitched chime of the microwave we had in our own kitchen, the one he'd insisted on buying. Because it was the quietest model on the market. My eyes darted to the microwave on the counter across the room. It was silent, but I had heard its echo, its twin. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just the sound, it was the timing. The lie was so seamless, so effortless. He wasn't in Chicago. He was somewhere with a kitchen that had the same microwave, somewhere. He felt comfortable enough to answer the phone. Sarah, are you still there? His voice was sharp, now impatient. Yes, I whispered, the word caught in my throat. Sorry to bother you. I hung up before he could say another word. My legs gave way, and I slid to the floor, my back against the cold cabinets. The terror wasn't hot and frantic. It was cold, a deep settling cold that froze me from the inside out. This wasn't a moment of passion, a clumsy affair. The phone call had been a perfect, chilling performance. He had answered, ready with a story. Prepared, he had anticipated my doubt. The realization was more devastating than any shouted confession could have been. He was a mastermind, and I had been living inside his illusion. The clarity was terrifying. The business trip was a complete fabrication. A cover story for a life he had built elsewhere. The locked drawer, the earring, the perfume, they weren't mistakes, they were parts of a blueprint. And I was only now seeing the full structure. The sheer effort of it was staggering. Maintaining two separate lives, two separate identities, required a level of calculation. I had never imagined him capable of this. Wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage. It was an assault on my perception. Systematic dismantling of my reality. He hadn't just been lying to me. He had been re-educating me to distrust my own senses. And then, the most sinister thought of all crept in. What if this was his intention? What if he wanted me to find out the phone call hadn't been an accident I stumbled upon? It was a test I set for myself. But what if he had laid the clues, knowing I would eventually set that test? The idea that his deception was not just a secret to be kept, but a game to be played, a psychological trap he had been slowly closing around me for months, maybe years, was a horror far greater than simple infidelity. His. Hello, she said again, a little laugh in her voice. You there? The flight tracker said you landed 20 minutes ago. Departure wasn't an escape, it was him moving to the next stage of the game, waiting for me to catch up. I sat on the floor for a long time, the cold from the tiles seeping into my bones. The house was silent. But now the silence felt different. It wasn't empty. It was complicit. He had turned my home into a stage. And I had been the only actor who didn't know she was in a play. The road ahead wasn't about healing a broken heart. It was about something much more difficult, rebuilding a shattered mind. I had to learn to trust my own eyes again, my own ears. I had to reclaim a reality that he had stolen and twisted. Into a funhouse mirror reflection. The cowardice wasn't in his leaving, it was in the intricate cruel web of lies he had woven to make me doubt the very ground beneath my feet. And as I finally pulled myself up from the floor, I knew the most frightening thing was that the game might not be over. He was still out there, the master of the board, and I was just a piece he had momentarily left alone. The first sign wasn't a lipstick on a collar, or a late night at the office. It was a number on a bank statement, a withdrawal for a property tax payment on a house I had never seen in a town I'd never heard of. I almost missed it. It was listed under some vague business expense category. I was reconciling our accounts, something I did every month, a task I found mundane, but necessary. I remember my finger stopping on the line. The amount was significant, and the description was just off. Enough to make me pause. I thought it was a mistake, a miscategorization, so I dug deeper. That single thread, when I pulled it, began to unravel everything. I started a quiet, methodical investigation. I created a separate folder on my computer, password protected. I began printing statements I'd normally just review online. I ordered a full credit report for both of us. That's when I found the second credit card. The one I wasn't an authorized user on. The statements were mailed to a P.O. box. I saw loans I never signed for lines of credit opened in both our names, but without my knowledge. He had been very careful. He'd used a separate email address, a separate phone, but he'd gotten sloppy with that one property tax payment. He'd funded it from our main joint account, probably because the money was due, and his secret account was low. The picture that emerged was one of systematic financial drainage. He wasn't just having an affair, he was funding an entire separate life. There were payments for a second mortgage, for utilities, for car payments on a vehicle I didn't recognize. He was paying for preschool tuition. The amounts were staggering. He had been siphoning off our shared assets for years. Our retirement savings were lighter. The college fund we had for our son had seen smaller contributions than I'd believed. He had been playing a shell game with our financial future, and I was the one about to be left with empty shells. The emotional betrayal was one thing, but this was different. This was a cold, calculated financial betrayal that threatened my actual security. I moved from shock into a kind of clinical focus. The emotion was there, a constant hum of panic in the background. But I forced it down. This was now a forensic exercise. I needed proof. I started with public records. I searched online property records for his name, and I found it, a deed for a house in that other town purchased 5 years ago. His name was on it alongside a woman's name that wasn't mine. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with romance. This was the chill of legal reality setting. I finally found my own voice. It sounded thin and strange. I am sorry, I said. Who is this? I spent nights researching. I wasn't looking up signs of a cheating husband anymore. I was reading state statutes. I was looking up the legal definition of bigamy. And that's when the situation shifted from a marital crisis to a criminal one. I learned that in our state, marrying another person while still legally married to someone else isn't just a moral failing, it's a felony. It's perjury. Because you sign a marriage license, swearing you are free to marry. It's fraud. And every financial transaction he conducted with this second identity, every loan application he filled out listing only his income or misrepresenting his assets, was potentially another crime. The most daunting task was confirming the marriage. I needed a marriage certificate. I hired a private investigator. It felt like something from a movie. But it was the most pragmatic decision I'd ever made. The investigator was calm, professional. He understood the situation. Immediately, a week later, he delivered a manila envelope to my office. Inside was a certified copy of a marriage license from another county. My husband's signature was there, his date of birth, his parents' names, everything was correct. Except the bride's name. It was her, the woman from the property deed. They had been legally married for almost 4 years. My own marriage certificate, tucked away in a safe deposit box, was now a piece of evidence in a fraud case. The implications were immense. My marriage could be declared null and void. I might not be entitled to the same spousal support I would have received in a divorce. The entire legal foundation of my life for the past decade was built on a lie that was also a crime. I stared at that document for a long time, and I knew what I had to do. I had to call her, the other wife. It was the most terrifying phone call of my life. I didn't know what she knew. I didn't know if she was a victim like me, or if she was complicit. I rehearsed what I would say. I decided to be direct, factual, and unemotional. I found her number through a people search website linked to the property address. She answered on the third ring. I said her name, and I identified myself simply as the wife of husband's name. There was a long dead silence on the other end. I could hear her breathing stop. Then I said, I believe we are married to the same man. I heard a sharp intake of breath, but she didn't hang up. She just said, oh my God. And then I have a 2-year-old. And I said, I know, I've seen the financial records. That phone call was the catalyst for a strategic alliance. We met in person at a neutral coffee shop, halfway between our two towns. It was surreal. We were two women who should have been enemies. But we were now partners in a joint investigation. We were both pragmatic. The anger was there, but it was secondary to the need for survival. We agreed on a single goal: to protect ourselves and our children financially. And legally, we decided to work together to build an airtight case. We created a shared secure digital folder. We systematically pooled our evidence. I provided all the financial documents, the secret accounts, the property tax payment, the loans. She provided their marriage certificate photos from their wedding, a small ceremony on a beach, utility bills, and a detailed timeline of their life together. She had believed his stories about frequent business travel, just as I had. We compared notes on his routines, his excuses, his behavior. The picture of his double life became incredibly detailed, a map of deception that was undeniable. We were building a file for our lawyers, and potentially for law enforcement. There was a pause, a beat of silence, where I could hear background noise on her end. Maybe a television, the sound of a child playing. Who is this? She asked, her tone shifting from warm to cautious. Before we ever confronted him, we focused on protection. This is the most critical advice I can give anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation. You must secure your position before you reveal your knowledge. First, I opened a separate bank account at a completely different bank in my name. Only I started diverting a small portion of my paycheck into it. I needed my own operating funds. I went to a different branch of our current bank and withdrew half of the liquid assets from a joint savings account. This is legally permissible as it was a joint asset, but I knew it would be a point of contention later. I needed a financial safety net. I gathered all our important personal documents: my passport, my son's birth certificate, my social security card, the deed to our house, my car title. I made copies of every financial document I could find: bank statements, tax returns, investment portfolios. For the last 7 years, I stored all of this in a safe place outside the house, with a trusted friend. I changed the passwords on my personal email, and all my individual accounts. I consulted with a family law attorney, not just any attorney, but one who specialized in complex matrimonial cases involving fraud and hidden assets. That first consultation was expensive, but it was the best money I ever spent. The attorney explained my rights clearly. She outlined the realistic outcomes. She explained that because my marriage was potentially bigamous, the dissolution would be more complex than a standard divorce. We would likely need to file a motion to have the marriage declared void. The focus would shift from divorce law to equitable distribution and fraud. She advised me on how to document everything, what to say and not to say to my husband, and how to proceed with the other wife to present a united front. She empowered me with knowledge. Knowing the legal landscape turned my fear into a plan. When the day of confrontation came, it was not a dramatic, emotional scene. It was a meeting orchestrated by our attorneys. He walked into a conference room and saw both of us sitting there with our lawyers. The color drained from his face. We didn't yell, we didn't cry. We presented him with a summary of the evidence. We had a timeline, spreadsheets of the financial transfers, copies of the 2 marriage certificates. We showed him the watertight case we had built. His deception was no longer a secret, it was a documented fact. The aftermath is still unfolding. There are civil lawsuits to recover the misappropriated funds. There is the ongoing divorce proceeding, which is now intertwined with the potential criminal case for bigamy. It is a long, arduous process. But I am no longer a victim of his deception. I am an active participant in my own legal and financial future. The message I want to leave you with is this: if you suspect something this profound, your first instinct might be to confront, to demand an explanation. Don't. Your first priority must be to protect yourself. Your financial security is your independence. Your legal rights are your armor. Educate yourself. Gather evidence quietly and methodically. Seek expert counsel. What starts as a personal betrayal can reveal itself to be a systemic criminal deception. the path forward is not through emotional appeals. "This is Sarah," I said. "I think you have the wrong number." But through pragmatic, informed action, empowerment, in a situation like this doesn't come from revenge. It comes from preparedness. It comes from understanding that the law, while complex, is a tool you can use to rebuild the foundation he tried to destroy. It started with the silence, not a real silence, because his Instagram feed was still active. But it was a silence between us, reflected in the pixels he was posting less, which was the first thing he used to share silly things, a meme he knew I'd laugh at, a photo of our dog, that just stopped then. He stopped tagging me, I'd see a picture of a dinner he claimed was a client meal. And I wouldn't be in it, not that I was always there. But he'd stopped including me even in the story he was telling the world. The red flags weren't big and bright, they were tiny, almost invisible details you'd scroll past without a second thought. But when you live with someone, you notice the grammar of their life changing. There was a photo from one of his trips, a shot of his steak, and a glass of red wine. It was the reflection in the knife, just a sliver of the room behind him. But it wasn't a restaurant, it looked like a home, a domestic kitchen, with a specific kind of tile. Our kitchen has granite. This was subway tile. I zoomed until the image pixelated, trying to see more, but it was just a blur that felt like a lie. Another time, he geotagged a post from a bar called the Oak Room. I looked it up. It was in a city he'd never mentioned visiting for work. When I asked him about it later, he just said, oh, the client wanted to meet there, it was closer to their office. He said it smoothly, too smoothly. The doubt started to curdle in my stomach, a cold, heavy feeling. So I started my investigation. I became a social media detective. His profile was my crime scene. I began with his followers. He had a few new ones, mostly generic business accounts. But one was a woman. Her profile picture was just a landscape. But her username was a real name, Anna B22. I clicked through private account. But her bio said living life with a smile. And she had a few public photos. One was of a sunset, another was of a cup of coffee. Nothing. But I started checking her followers list, seeing if any names overlapped with his. Nothing obvious. Then I looked at the people he was following. There was an account for a local sports team in a city he never had reason to follow. I noted it down. I started looking at the comments on his older posts, the ones we were both in. I noticed a like from a woman named Sarah Jane, with a cartoon avatar. I didn't know her. Why was she liking a photo of us from 3 years ago? It felt like she was studying me the same way I was now studying him. The algorithm did the work for me in the end. I was scrolling through my own feed mindlessly. And there, it was in the suggested for you section, a face, a woman smiling with bright eyes. Her account was public. Her name was Chloe. And right there in her profile picture, she was leaning against a man. The photo was taken from the side. His face was partly turned away. But I knew the slope of his shoulder. I knew the jacket. It was the navy blue blazer I bought him for our anniversary. My heart didn't just sink, it plummeted. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear her breathing. Sarah. She repeated the name, seemed to mean nothing to her. I am trying to reach my husband Mark. Is this not Mark's phone? I clicked. Her feed was a curated life, photos of brunches, of sunsets, of her feet in the sand. And then there he was, not in every photo, but in enough. A picture of 2 wine glasses on a table, his hand resting next to one I knew, that hand, the scar on his knuckle from an old biking accident. A photo of them hiking, his arm around her waist, both smiling at the camera. The caption read, my favorite adventure buddy. So lucky to have this man explore the world with me. The date was from last October. He was supposed to be at a sales conference in Denver. I scrolled further back. There was a photo from a birthday dinner, his birthday. The caption was celebrating my amazing husband, another year of love and laughter. The cake had candles. He was blowing them out. I remembered that day he'd told me he had to work late, that we'd celebrate over the weekend. He came home tired, smelling of what he said was office coffee. Now I wondered if it was the smell of that restaurant. I felt numb. It was all there, a parallel life documented in high definition. I saw photos of them in cities I'd never been to, in restaurants I'd wanted to try. I saw a photo of her wearing a necklace I recognized. He'd told me he lost it on a business trip. I saw a picture of a dog, a little terrier, with the caption Daddy's home. And my husband was kneeling down, scratching its ears. We had talked about getting a dog. He always said he wasn't ready for the responsibility. The evidence was overwhelming. It was a timeline of betrayal written in captions and geotags. I took screenshots, I saved every image. I felt like an archivist of my own destruction. I needed proof, not for him, because he would lie, but for myself to prove that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts were right. I didn't know what to do. Do I call him? Do I wait until he gets home? The thought of confronting him face to face made me feel sick. The lies would be too slick, too practiced. He'd have an explanation for everything. The hiking photo, that's just a colleague. Honey, her husband was taking the picture. The birthday dinner, it was a surprise from the team. I didn't want to hurt your feelings. So I went back to the digital world. It felt like the only place I had any power. I went to Chloe's profile. I looked at her bio. It said wife, dog, mom, lover of life, wife. The word burned. I created a fake account, a generic name, a picture of a flower. I followed her. She didn't accept right away. The wait was agony. When she did accept the follow, I didn't scroll through her photos again. I went straight to the direct messages. My fingers were trembling so hard I could barely type. I didn't write a long message. I didn't accuse her of anything. I just wrote 2 sentences. I said, I think you should see this. And I attached the most recent photo I had of me and my husband from our vacation in Hawaii. We were both smiling, his arm around me. I hit send. The response was almost instantaneous. The little typing bubbles appeared and disappeared, appeared and disappeared for a full minute. They pulsed on the screen. Then a message came through. It was just one word. Who is this? I wrote back my name, his wife's name. The world tilted. The floor beneath my feet felt like it was falling away. Mark, my husband, my Mark. I had to lean against the dresser to stay upright. This is Mark's phone, I said, and my voice was a whisper. I am his wife. The bubbles appeared again, then a message, oh my God, then another, can I call you? She included her phone number. My hands were shaking. I picked up my phone and dialed the number. She answered. On the first ring, her voice was high and tight with panic. Is this real? She asked. Tell me this is some kind of joke. I told her it was real. I told her my name. I told her how long we'd been married. I asked her how long she'd been with him. She started to cry. She said they'd been together for 2 years. He told her I was his ex-wife, that we were only connected because of financial stuff, that I was unstable. He told her I was the one who didn't want a dog. He told her he was going to leave me, that it was just a matter of time. We compared dates. We compared stories. The business trips were the same. The weekends away were the same. We pieced together his double life like we were assembling a puzzle. She told me about the apartment he kept in the other city. She told me about the trips they took. She knew things about him. I didn't know little habits, preferences. I knew things about him. She didn't. The parts of his history he'd hidden from her. We were 2 halves of a whole truth. And talking to her was the most horrifying and clarifying experience of my life. The evidence was no longer just on a screen. It was in her voice, in her tears, in the shared dawning horror of what he had done to both of us. After the call, the real work began. The digital cleanup. I went through my own profiles, untagging myself from every photo of us. I unfriended him. I blocked him. I looked at every post, every memory. And it all felt tainted. Our entire relationship, our shared history, was now just a digital ghost town. I had to decide what to do with my own accounts. Do I post something? Do I make a statement? The humiliation was public. In a way, it was there for anyone who cared to look, to connect the dots. The pain was unique. It wasn't just the betrayal of a secret affair. It was the fact that his other life was so documented. It was performative. He was actively building a life with her online for everyone to see, while building a life with me. It felt like a special kind of cruelty. It made me question every happy memory. Was he posting a photo with me? While texting her, was he thinking of her when he wrote a loving comment on my post? Rebuilding after that feels different. It's not just about getting over a person. It's about relearning how to exist online, how to trust the digital world again. Every notification, every suggested friend alert sends a jolt of anxiety through me. I look at my own photos differently now. Is this an accurate representation of my life? Am I telling the truth? The main lesson, the one that stays with me, is to trust that feeling, that gut instinct. When something feels off, the digital world leaves footprints, it leaves a trail. And if you feel like something in the feed doesn't add up, it probably doesn't. The clues are there, the reflection in the knife, the unknown follower, the geotag in the wrong city. They are the whispers of a truth that doesn't want to be seen. And sometimes the most painful thing is to finally listen to them. For 15 years, the sounds of our home were my favorite sounds in the world. The chaotic symphony of breakfast, the thud of backpacks hitting the floor after school, the sound of my husband Mark, reading a bedtime story with different voices for every character. We were a living, breathing Christmas card. Our biggest worries were school projects and muddy footprints on the clean floor. We had inside jokes that would make us laugh. Until we cried. We planned vacations to see the Grand Canyon, saving loose change. The silence that followed was different. It was thick, heavy with dawning horror. It wasn't just confusion anymore, it was a terrible, silent understanding traveling down the line between us. I could feel it, a cold wave from her end to mine. Big glass jar on the kitchen counter. Mark was the dad who coached soccer, who never missed a recital, who built elaborate blanket forts on rainy Sundays. He was the rock. When he told us about the sudden business trip to Denver, it was just another part of our normal. I helped him pack the kids. Sarah and Liam drew pictures for him to take, little crayon scenes of our family, with a smiling son in the corner. He promised to video call every night. He hugged them so tight. I remember thinking how lucky we were. The illusion was so complete, so beautifully crafted, that the thought of a crack in its surface never even crossed my mind. It was a perfect, happy fortress. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. The house was quiet, the kids were at school, the number was unfamiliar, out of state. I almost didn't answer. The woman's voice on the other end was strained tight, with a tension I couldn't place. She said her name was Clara. She asked if I was married to Mark. My first foolish thought was that there had been an accident in Denver. But then she said, I think my husband is your husband too. The world didn't shatter with a loud crash. It just dissolved. The floor beneath my feet turned to dust. She laid out the facts with a chilling, exhausted precision. They lived 2 states away. They had been together for 12 years. They had 2 children, a boy 9 and a girl 7. She had found my number scribbled on a scrap of paper tucked inside a book. The math was the most brutal part, the overlapping years, the birthday of her son born just 11 months after our Sarah. The realization wasn't just that my husband had another wife, it was that my children had another family, half-siblings living a parallel life, a dark mirror of our own happy home. The conversation with Clara shifted from confrontation to a shared, horrified collapse. We were 2 strangers tethered together by the same lie, crying on the phone, our sobs echoing the same devastating question: what do we tell the children? Telling them was the most impossible task I have ever faced. How do you explain to a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old that their world is built on a lie? We sat them down on the same sofa, where Wed cuddled for movie nights. I tried to use simple words to shield them from the ugliest parts. I said Daddy had made some very big mistakes. I said he had another family in another state. The confusion on their faces was worse than anger. Sarah, my bright, logical girl, asked, does that mean he's not our real dad? Liam, my sensitive boy, just whispered, why doesn't he love us anymore? There were no good answers. There were only their shattered expressions, the trust in their eyes turning to ash. They asked if they had to share their rooms. They asked if they had to call the other kids their brother and sister. They asked if this was why Daddy missed Liam's last soccer game. A million questions that all boiled down to one thing: their entire understanding of safety and family had been ripped away. The logistics that followed were a special kind of hell. Co-parenting with a ghost. Mark moved into a bleak apartment, a purgatory between his 2 broken lives. Arranging visitations became a nightmare of logistics and suppressed rage. The kids didn't want to see him. When they did, they came home quiet and withdrawn. Sarah would get angry over tiny things, slamming doors. Liam started wetting the bed again. And then there was the other family, Clara, and I, bound by this trauma, started talking tentatively at first. Then more often we had to coordinate holidays. We had to compare the stories he told us. We discovered the intricate web of excuses, the fake conferences, the fabricated client dinners that covered for his double life. Our children were now irrevocably linked to hers. They were siblings. We couldn't pretend they didn't exist. Things had been off, not big things, little things, like a missed call on his phone last week from a number I didn't recognize. When I asked him about it, he just shrugged and said it was probably a spam call. Then a few days ago, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket for a necklace, a delicate silver chain. I felt a little flutter of excitement, thinking it was for our anniversary next month. But when our anniversary came and went, there was no necklace. He gave me flowers, beautiful ones. But your wife, she said, and the words were choked. No, that's not my husband, is Mark Evans. We've been married for 6 years. Picking up the pieces felt like trying to glue a shattered vase back together. With tears, the first and most important step was therapy for all of us, for the kids individually and together. I needed it just to get through the day, without screaming. We had to learn a new language for our new reality. The word family had to be redefined. It wasn't the picture-perfect unit from the Christmas card. Anymore, it was messier. It was me and Sarah, and Liam in a new smaller house. It was establishing new routines, new traditions that were solely ours. We started a Friday night pizza and board game tradition, no exceptions. It was our anchor. Relationship with Clara and her children is the most complex part of this new map. It's not a friendship, not really, it's an alliance forged in fire. We've had a few awkward meetings at neutral parks watching our children, these siblings, who share a father's face, size each other up, was heartbreaking. And strangely hopeful, there's a cautious curiosity. They are a living reminder of the betrayal. But they are also innocent, just like mine. They are casualties of the same war. We are navigating this together, Claire and I, because we have to for them. The long-term effects are what keep me up at night. I see the shadow in Sarah's eyes. When a friend talks about her dad, she's become fiercely independent, wary of needing anyone. Liam still asks sometimes if this is all a bad dream. I worry constantly about the scars this will leave on their ability to trust, to love, to believe in the stability of a promise. My job now is to show them every single day that honesty is the only foundation that matters, that love isn't a performance, it's showing up even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Our home is quieter now. The future we dreamed of is gone, but we are building a new one, brick by painful brick. It's a family built not on an illusion of perfection, but on the raw, messy truth. It's built on the love between a mother and her children, a bond that, despite everything, remained unbroken. The happy family wasn't real, but the love I have for them is, and that is the only truth strong enough to build on. For years, I thought I had a good marriage. That's the foundation of it all, isn't it? The story you tell yourself and everyone else. We had the house, the shared calendar, the comfortable routines. We could talk for an hour about our days without ever saying a single thing that truly mattered. The cracks weren't dramatic. They were silent hairline fractures that ran through every interaction. It was the way I'd start to say an idea and then stop myself, gauging his reaction before I committed to my own thought. It was the slow, quiet erosion of my own opinions, sanded down to fit the shape of his preferences. The cage was made of pleasantries. It was built with the furniture we bought together, and the vacations we planned. It was reinforced every time I laughed at a joke I didn't find funny or bit my tongue. Instead of starting a debate, I felt myself becoming smaller, a condensed version of the person I knew I used to be. The feeling was a low hum of stagnation, a sense that my life was on pause, while his continued on its own track. His constant business trips began to feel less like an inconvenience and more. I've been married to Mark Evans for 8 years, I heard myself say. It was like someone else was speaking. We were just stating facts into a void, but each fact was a shard of glass. Like a metaphor, he was always leaving long before he ever physically walked out the door. His absence was a constant state of being. And I have to be honest, there was a secret feeling, a terrible guilty relief. When he would leave, the house would fall quiet. I could breathe without performing. I could eat what I wanted, watch what I wanted, be silent if I wanted. In those spaces, I would catch glimpses of my old self, the one who was messy and passionate, and had strong, unvetted opinions about things. She was still in there, buried under years of compromise and accommodation. I'd feel her stir, and then the guilt would rush. In this is a good life, I'd tell myself. This is what stability feels like. You're just restless. But that restlessness was the most honest part of me, a survival instinct I had been ignoring for a decade. The day it happened, he was on another one of his trips. The phone rang, and I almost didn't answer. It was an unknown number, but something made me pick it up. It felt less like a decision, and more like an impulse, a deep cellular need to know, to finally know. Answering that call was the first truly courageous thing I had done in years. It was an active choice to face whatever was on the other side, instead of comfortably ignoring it. Voice on the other end was calm but frayed at the edges. She said her name, and it meant nothing to me at first. Then she said her husband's name, and then she said my husband's name, and she didn't have to say anything else. The pieces didn't just fall into place, they slammed together with a force that knocked the air out of me. The affair, the business trips that weren't the life he had been living, in a parallel universe. The shock was a physical blow, a cold wave that started at my scalp and rushed down to my feet. I had to sit on the floor, the cool hardwood against my legs, the only thing that felt real. But amidst the vertigo, there was this clarity, a brutal, devastating clarity. It was the explanation for everything: the emotional distance, the vague excuses, the feeling that I was living with a ghost. The other woman, her name was Sarah, wasn't calling to be cruel. She was calling for the same reason. I answered: a desperate need for the truth. We talked for a long time, two strangers, connected by the same lie. Our conversation was less about the betrayal itself, and more about piecing together the timeline, comparing notes on the man we thought we knew. It was a grim collaborative effort to dismantle the shared illusion we had both been living in. By the end of that call, the marriage was over. It had been over for a long time. I realized I was just the last one to know. In that strange, painful conversation, we freed each other. The grief was immediate and overwhelming. The first few days were a blur of tears and disbelief. But something surprising happened very quickly. The grief was accompanied by a fierce rising energy. It was like the shock of the truth had jump-started a system that had been on standby for years. I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. I had to act. The pain was a fuel. I hired a lawyer within the week. It was the first major decision I made entirely for myself, without a single thought for what he would want or how he would react. Finding a new apartment was terrifying, but it was also exhilarating. It was a blank slate, a space that was mine alone. I remember standing in the empty living room before I moved any furniture in, and for the first time the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt like potential. "He's on a business trip," she said, but her voice was uncertain, now trembling. "To Chicago. He left this morning." I started the process of reclaiming my own identity. It sounds like a cliché, but it's a real tangible process. I dug out old boxes from my parents' attic, boxes filled with my things. From before we met, I found journals where I had written stories. I found photos of myself with friends I had let drift away. I called one of them my old college roommate. I told her everything, and she just said, "It's about time. I've missed you." I started to rebuild that support system, the one I had neglected, because my entire world had shrunk to the size of my marriage. I started making decisions, big and small. I painted a wall in my new apartment, a color he would have hated, deep, vibrant coral. I started cooking with spices he found too strong. I went back to school, finally enrolling in the writing course I had talked about for a decade. Every independent choice, no matter how small, was a brick laid in the foundation of my new life. His departure was no longer a loss I mourned. It was the removal of a barrier. It was the thing that had to happen for me to remember how to be myself. He didn't just leave me, he set me free. Now looking back, I can see the entire event not as an ending, but as a violent necessary beginning. That phone call was the spark that burned my old life to the ground. And from those ashes, I had no choice but to rise. I had to build something new. And in doing so, I discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. I am living a life now that is entirely my own. It's more authentic, and it's more powerful. The path was painful, and I would never have chosen it. But I am grateful for the truth. I am grateful for freedom. Most of all, I am grateful for the self-knowledge it forced upon me. I had to answer that call to finally start listening to my own voice again, and it turns out it's a voice I really like. He told me he was going to Chicago. I said he left this morning. We both stopped. The pieces were clicking into place with a soundless, brutal finality. I could hear her breathing get quicker, shallower. I realized I was holding my own breath. "Describe him," she said suddenly, her voice sharp with panic. "What does he look like?" And so I did. I described my husband: the slight wave in his brown hair, the little scar above his eyebrow from a childhood accident, the way he smiles with one side of his mouth higher than the other. With every detail, she made a small pained sound, a confirmation. "My God," she whispered. "Oh my God." Her voice broke. "He has a daughter, Chloe. She's 4. He's her father." I felt like I'd been punched. "We didn't have children. We'd been trying." He said he wanted them so badly. He said it was his biggest dream. All those conversations, all those hopes, they were just lines, a script he was performing for me, while he lived a whole other life with them. We started talking faster, then our words tumbling over each other. We compared dates. His business trips were her anniversaries, his weekends working late were her family vacations. We exchanged the little lies he'd told each of us to explain his absences. They were so similar, the patterns so clear. We were two archaeologists uncovering the same ruin from two different sides. The picture that emerged was monstrous: a man who had built two complete worlds, who had two families, two sets of friends, too. Kept thinking about that receipt. I asked him about it casually over dinner. He looked confused for a second, then laughed it off, said, It must have been a mistake maybe he picked up the wrong receipt at the store. It sounded plausible. I wanted it to be plausible. Lives and he had juggled it all perfectly for years. The conversation ended when she started to cry deep ragged sobs that she tried to stifle. She said she had to go, she had to check everything, she promised to send me pictures. She promised we would talk again. We hung up. And the silence that rushed back into the room was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I stood there in the middle of our bedroom, and the world had fundamentally changed. The color had drained from everything, the room, our bed, the photos. On the wall it all looked like a museum exhibit, a diorama of a life that had never been real. The rage came first, a white-hot blinding fury. I wanted to smash things. I wanted to tear the photos from the walls. I wanted to scream until my voice gave out. But the fury was immediately swallowed by a grief so profound, it had no bottom. It was a physical weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I sank to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. And I didn't cry, I couldn't, the hurt was too big for tears. And then a strange icy clarity. The confusion was gone, all the little doubts, the rationalizations, they were swept away. I knew with absolute certainty that my life as I understood it was over. I got up, my body felt like it belonged to someone else. I went back to his phone. I started searching. I looked at his emails. I found a separate account. One I never knew existed. I looked at his messages. There were threads with her filled with pet names and plans and photos of a little girl with his smile. I saw his photos. There were hundreds, pictures of them, on a beach, pictures of him holding Chloe on his shoulders, pictures of a Christmas morning in a living room I had never seen. I saw it all. I methodically uncovered every lie, every secret, every betrayal. It was like reading a horror story about my own life. With each new discovery, the pain would spike, and then the numbness would settle back, and I was building a case against my own husband, and the evidence was irrefutable. I knew he would call the house phone, eventually wondering where his phone was. I had to decide what to do. Do I answer? Do I confront him over the phone? Do I wait for him to come home and see the shattered remains of his deception laid bare on my face? I thought about packing a bag and leaving. I thought about changing the locks. I thought about calling a lawyer. But mostly, I just sat there on the floor, surrounded by the proof of my own blindness. The goodbye kiss that morning played over and over in my head, the warmth of his lips, the lie in his eyes. I thought about the necklace. I wondered if he bought one for her too. I thought about the distance. It wasn't work stress. It was the exhaustion of maintaining two entire lives. Life I had lived for 8 years was an illusion, a beautiful, comfortable cage. And that phone call was the key, turning the lock. The door was open now. And on the other side was a terrifying, empty landscape, a future I had never planned for, but it was real for the first time in a long time. It was real. And I knew as I sat there in the wreckage of my marriage that the woman who answered that phone was gone. She was a character in a story he wrote. And I was left with the terrible, quiet task of figuring out who. There was a distance to a space between us that hadn't been there before. He'd be on his phone, more texting, always tilting the screen away from me. When I'd walk into the room, he'd lock it. Quickly he said it was work stress, a big deal he was trying to close. He said he was just tired. And I believed him. I think I worked harder to believe him. Because the alternative was too frightening to consider. I made his favorite meals. I tried to be more understanding. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. Was left behind. I always trusted my husband. It was a fundamental part of our life, like the foundation of our house. I never felt the need to check up on him. His phone would buzz on the coffee table, and I'd just hand it to him, without a second thought. His laptop sat open on the kitchen counter, and the idea of looking through it never even crossed my mind. That was the person I was, or the person I thought I was. The change started so slowly. It was almost imperceptible. It was in the little things, the tiny shifts in behavior that you notice in your peripheral vision, but dismiss as stress or work pressure. It was about a month before he was supposed to leave for his big business trip to Denver. He'd always been casual with his phone, leaving it face up on the table. Suddenly, it was always face down. He started taking it with him, everywhere, even to the bathroom. If it rang while he was in the shower, he'd call out, "Can you check who that is?" But if I even moved toward it, he'd quickly say, "Never mind, I'll get it later." It was a new kind of protectiveness, a quiet vigilance. Then there was the new password on his laptop. For 10 years wed, used the same password for everything, a combination of our anniversary and our daughter's birthday. One evening, I went to use his computer to print a boarding pass for an upcoming trip to see my mother. The password didn't work. I tried again. Nothing. I called out to him. Hey, did you change your password? He was in the garage. And he took a moment to answer. He came in wiping his hands on a rag. And said, oh yeah, IT at work made us update everything for security. It's a hassle. He typed it in quickly, his body angled to block the screen. He didn't offer to tell me what the new password was. I didn't ask. But the seed was planted, a tiny hard little seed of doubt. The real spark the moment the seed cracked open was the luggage tag. He'd bought a new suitcase for this trip. A fancy hard-shelled thing he was packing a few days early, which was unlike him. I walked into our bedroom, and he was bent over the suitcase folding a shirt. The old frayed luggage tag from his previous bag was sitting on the dresser. I picked it up thinking I'd just transfer it for him. It was one of those leather ones with a clear plastic window, and tucked behind our home address on a small folded piece of paper was another address. It was written in a woman's handwriting, loopy and elegant. It was an address in Chesterton, Indiana. I stood there holding the little piece of leather and plastic, feeling the world tilt. Denver was the destination. Chesterton, Indiana was what a stopover, a lie. I unfolded the paper. There was no name, just the address, but it felt like a clue, a piece of evidence. I didn't say anything. I carefully refolded the paper, slipped it back behind our address, and placed the tag on his suitcase. My heart was hammering in my chest, but my mind was suddenly terrifyingly clear. This wasn't about jealousy or hysterics. This was a problem that required a solution. I needed data. I needed proof. The time for trusting was over. The investigation had begun. The first phase was digital. It had to be the physical world he moved in was his own. But the digital trail was a record. It was evidence waiting to be collected. I started with what I had access to, our shared computer. I went through the browser history. It was mostly cleared, which was another red flag. But he'd forgotten to clear the history on his work profile. I found searches for long-term rentals, Chesterton, IN, and best schools in Porter County. My blood ran cold. Best that a strong marriage was built on trust, and I was failing at that trust by even having these doubts. Schools that wasn't for a business trip, that was for a life. I checked our bank statements next. Our main joint account seemed normal, but then I looked at the logins. I saw that he had a separate login for a savings account I never knew about. I couldn't access it without a password, but its existence was a fact, a hidden account. I moved to the phone bill. It was all itemized, a list of every call and text. I downloaded the last 6 months of statements into a spreadsheet. It was a massive grid of numbers and dates. I started sorting, filtering, and there it was. One number appeared hundreds of times, calls that lasted for hours late into the night, when he was supposedly working in his study. Text messages back and forth all day long. I cross-referenced the area code. It was an Indiana number, a Chesterton, Indiana number. Each discovery was like a punch to the gut, but I treated the pain as background noise. It was data too, a record of my own breaking heart, but irrelevant to the mission. The mission was the truth. I created a folder on my own secret laptop. I named it Denver Project. Inside I had subfolders: financial communications, physical evidence. I saved screenshots of the phone bills, highlighting the frequent number. I saved the browser history searches. I documented everything with dates and times. I was building a case, my own case. The breakthrough came when I was reviewing the credit card statement. He had a card for work expenses, but I saw a charge for a jewelry store in Indiana, a place called Gemstones Gold. The charge was for $700. It wasn't a business expense. I Googled the store. It specialized in engagement rings and anniversary bands. That's when I knew I had to see the other side. I needed to put a face to the phone number. I created a fake Facebook profile, a generic picture of a flower, a name pulled from a phone book. I searched for the phone number. Nothing. I searched for women's names in Chesterton, Indiana, and started cross-referencing. It was tedious, like sifting through sand. Then I had an idea. I searched for the address from the luggage tag on Google Maps. It was a nice suburban house, beige with blue shutters. I used the street view function to look up and down the street, and I saw a minivan in the next-door neighbor's driveway. On the van's bumper, a sticker for a local soccer league. I searched for that soccer league's website. They had a photo gallery from the previous season. I scrolled through picture after picture of kids kicking a ball. And then I saw him, my husband. He was on the sidelines cheering. Next to him was a woman with blonde hair, and he had his arm around her. And in front of them, 2 little girls in soccer uniforms, 2 little girls who looked up at him with a familiar adoration, the same look our daughter. Him. I felt a silence descend on me, a cold, hollow silence. The evidence was no longer abstract, it was a woman, it was children. It was a life. I printed the photograph. The paper was warm from the printer. But it felt like ice in my hands. I filed it in the physical evidence folder. The case was nearly complete. But I needed a confession, not from him, he would leave, but from the universe itself. I needed irrefutable audio proof. The day of the call, I was cleaning the bedroom, I was putting his laundry away. And I saw it on his nightstand, his phone. He'd forgotten it. A little jolt went through me. It was such an uncharacteristic mistake. He never went anywhere without his phone, especially not on a business trip. I picked it up. The screen was black, cool, and smooth in my hand. I thought about just putting it in a drawer, waiting for him to realize it and call the house phone. That's what a trusting wife would do. His departure for Denver was a pantomime. The kiss goodbye felt like ash the moment his car pulled away. I moved to phase 3. I had planned it for days. He had, as I knew he would forgotten his personal phone. He'd left it charging on the kitchen counter. A little too obviously a test perhaps, or a trap for me. But it was my trap for him. I knew the other woman would call. He would have to call her from a payphone, or his burner phone. To explain the situation, he would tell her his wife had his phone. He would warn her not to call, but the human impulse, the need for connection, is strong. I was counting on it. I sat at the kitchen table, his phone in front of me. I felt like a detective on a stakeout. I had my own phone ready to record. I had a notepad and a pen. The house was silent. An hour passed. Then too, I started to think my plan had failed. Then it lit up. The screen flashed. The caller ID said unknown number. But I knew, I felt it in my bones. This was it, the final piece. I took a deep breath. I pressed the record button on my phone. I picked up his phone. I didn't say hello. I answered like a professional. This is husband's name's phone. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. A woman's voice, young and anxious, said, "Oh, is he there?" I was calm, methodical. "No, he's not available. This is his wife. Can I ask who's calling?" The silence on the line was deafening. I could hear children laughing in the background. "Her children," I continued, my voice even almost kind. "It's Linda, isn't it?" Another gasp. How do you know my name?" And so I began the interview. I didn't accuse, I confirmed. "I just want to make sure I have the details right for my records. You live at 1243 Maple Drive, Chesterton." She was crying now, softly. "Yes." "And your daughters are Sarah and Emily?" "They're 7 and 5. A sob. "Yes." "And my husband, he's been living with you during his trips to Indiana for the past 3 years." She was broken. The truth poured out of her. She thought I knew. She thought he was separated, that our marriage was all but over, that I was difficult and cold. He had built me a prison in his story for her, and now she was describing its walls to me. I got everything I needed: dates, duration, the name of the elementary school, the fact he called her his wife. I had it all on tape. "Thank you, Linda," I said. And I hung up. The investigation was over. The case was closed. There was no screaming, no crying. Not then. There was only action. A profound, focused calm settled over me. I was no longer the victim of this story. I was the author of its next chapter. I went to my office. I emailed the recorded phone call, the spreadsheet of phone records, the bank statements, the photograph from the soccer game, and a concise timeline of events to my lawyer. I wrote a clear, unemotional message. "I believe we have grounds for divorce. I have attached all supporting documentation. Please advise on next steps." I copied everything to a secure cloud drive he could never access. Then I called the bank. I placed a freeze on our joint accounts and the hidden savings account I'd discovered. I changed the locks on the house. Every action was precise, deliberate. I was reclaiming control, piece by piece. The emotional storm would come later, I knew that, but for now I was a force of logic. I was the architect of my own survival. When he returned from his business trip, he looked tired, but happy. He came through the front door, his key jangling in the lock. But it didn't turn. The new lock held. He had to ring the bell. I answered. I didn't let him in. I stood in the doorway. He looked confused. "Honey, my key didn't work." I held out a manila envelope. "It's over," I said. My voice was steady. "Everything is in there. The phone records, the bank statements, the picture from the soccer game, the recording of my conversation with Linda." His face, but that cold knot in my stomach was back, tighter this time. It was a physical feeling, a pull. I stood there for a long time, just holding the phone, my thumb hovering over the button to wake it up. This is an invasion of privacy. I thought, this is wrong. What if I find nothing? What will that say about me? What if I find something? The silence in the house was absolute. I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. It felt like a crossroads. I could put the phone down, go back to folding laundry, go back to my life, or I collapsed. It was a physical crumbling, the color drained away. I can explain, he stammered. I shook my head. There's no explanation. I need to hear. My lawyer will be in touch. Don't try to call me. I closed the door. I heard him slump against it, a muffled sound of despair. I didn't feel pity. I felt a clean, sharp sense of finality. The confrontation I had planned wasn't a screaming match. It was a transaction. I presented the evidence. He received the consequences. I had moved from being the betrayed wife to the investigator who solved the case. And now I was the woman building a new life on a foundation of hard, unshakable truth. The deception was his, but the power to end it, that was mine. And that made all the difference. My life was perfect. I know how that sounds, but it's true. It wasn't a show for anyone else. It was my reality. Mark traveled a lot for his consulting work, but he made every homecoming an event. He'd walk through the door, drop his suitcase, and sweep our daughter Chloe up into his arms. Before he even kissed me, he always smelled like airplane air and his specific cologne. And that smell meant safety. It meant my husband was home. We had our routines. He'd always text me when his flight landed, touchdown, see my girls soon. That was the signal for me to start the pasta water, or to take the chicken out of the marinade. That particular Tuesday his text came right on time. I remember smiling at my phone, wiping my hands on a kitchen towel. Chloe was coloring at the table, her little tongue poked out in concentration. The house was filled with that golden late afternoon light. Everything was exactly as it should be. I called his dedicated business trip phone, the one he said was for clients and work emergencies. I just wanted to ask if he'd prefer the red wine or the white with dinner. It was a silly domestic question, the kind of question you ask when you feel secure in your life. A woman answered on the second ring. Her voice was pleasant, a little tired sounding. Hello. For a second I thought I'd misdialed. I pulled the phone away from my ear to check the number. It was correct. I am sorry, I said, a little laugh in my voice. I think I have the wrong number. I was trying to reach Mark. There was a silence on the other end, not an empty silence, but a thick, heavy one. I could almost feel her processing. Then her voice changed. It lost all its softness. You are speaking to Mark's wife. Who is this? The floor didn't drop out from under me. It felt more like the entire room, the entire house, just evaporated into pixels. I was standing in a void. My own voice sounded distant, like it was coming from another person. I am his wife. This is Sarah. The sound she made was half a gasp, half a sob. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated recognition. Sarah, she repeated. And the name was a curse on her lips. My God, he told me, that was his secretary's name, his secretary who couldn't ever get anything right. Could look. We stood there in that terrible silence, connected by 1,000 miles of fiber optic cable, two strangers, holding the two broken halves of the same truth. Her name was Elizabeth. She had been married to Mark for 15 years. They had a son, Jacob, who was 12. Mark's business trips to my city were his weekends at home with her. The life I had built, the love I thought was mine, was just a duplicate, a shadow life, running parallel to the real one. I was the other woman, and I never even knew it. The questions started tumbling out, frantic and desperate. When were you married? I asked, my voice trembling. October 12th, she said. And the date hit me like a physical blow. Our anniversary was October 12th. He must have thought it was funny, a private joke. Where does he live with you? I managed to ask. She gave me an address, and I had to sit down on the kitchen floor right there. It was an apartment building downtown, a place he'd told me he was considering for an investment property. He'd even taken me to see a unit, once asking my opinion on the countertops. We compared dates. We compared stories. The conference in Chicago, where he'd supposedly won an award. He'd been with me at the beach for a long weekend. The team-building retreat in the mountains. That was when Jacob had his appendix out. Elizabeth had been a wreck, and Mark had been by her side the whole time, texting me apologies for being unreachable due to poor signal. Every lie had a counterpart. Every absence in her life was a presence in mine, and vice versa. We were the negative and positive of the same. Photographs. The initial shock was a fire burning hot and fast. It was rage, a blinding, screaming anger at the sheer audacity of the deception. But as we talked, as the full picture emerged, the fire died down to embers, and a cold, chilling reality set in. This wasn't just an affair. This was bigamy. This was 2 mortgages, 2 families, 2 sets of family photos on 2 different mantelpieces. What was my legal standing? Was our marriage even valid? Did Elizabeth's marriage invalidate mine? The financial terror was immediate. Our joint account, the college fund for Chloe, the life insurance, is any of it real? Or was it all just a house of cards? After that first earth-shattering call, we hung up, both of us too stunned to continue. But an hour later my phone rang. It was her. We talked again. This time it was less about the emotional tsunami, and more about survival. We needed evidence. We needed to be sure beyond any doubt before we confronted him. It was a surreal, practical alliance born from utter devastation. We became detectives, partners, in uncovering the life of the man we both loved. Elizabeth found the bank statements for an account I never knew existed. I found the key to a post office box he kept filled with letters from her, and report cards from Jacob. We emailed each other documents, photos of him with me at Chloe's birthday party, timestamped on the same day. He was supposedly presenting a quarterly report in another state, photos of him with Elizabeth and Jacob at a baseball game, wearing a jersey I'd bought him as a Father's Day gift. We were piecing together a jigsaw puzzle of a man who didn't actually exist. The man I married was a composite, a fiction. The real Mark was the architect of the lie, and we were only now meeting him. I pressed the button. The screen lit up. No password. He'd never put a password on his phone. Another thing I'd never questioned. I was about to open his messages, my heart hammering in my chest. When it rang, the vibration startled me so much I almost dropped it. The screen lit up with the caller's name. It was the same unknown number, the one from last week. It was calling now. We agreed to confront him together. It was the only way. If we did it separately, he'd spin more lies, play us against each other. He'd tell me that Elizabeth was unstable, that she was refusing to let go. He'd tell her that I was a fling that had gotten out of hand. United, we had the whole truth. We decided on a video call. He was due to return from his trip to Elizabeth the next evening. We scheduled it for a time when we knew he'd be home with her, when I would normally be expecting my good night text. Seeing his face pop up on the screen was a visceral shock. He was smiling, relaxed. "Hey honey," he said. And for a heartbreaking second, I didn't know which one of us he was talking to. Then Elizabeth moved her camera, and I saw her living room, the familiar bookshelf behind her. His smile froze, then shattered. He looked from her face on the screen to me in my little box, and the color drained from his. He didn't say a word. He just stared, his mouth slightly open, a man watching his own execution. Elizabeth spoke first. Her voice was steady, icy. "Mark, Sarah and I have been having a fascinating conversation." She laid it out point by point, the dates, the lies, the evidence we had collected. I just watched him. I watched the excuses die in his eyes before he could even form them. There was no way out. The two worlds he had so carefully kept apart were now colliding in front of him, and we were both there witnessing the collapse. He finally broke down. It wasn't a grand apologetic performance. It was a messy, shameful unraveling. He tried to explain it as a mistake that snowballed, a situation he couldn't escape. But there was no explanation that could ever cover the scale of it. The love I felt for him curdled in that moment, replaced by a profound and weary pity. This man I had built a life with, who had held my hand when I gave birth, was a stranger, a coward. In the days that followed, the practical nightmares began. Lawyers had to be hired. We had to determine the legality of our marriages. We had to untangle a web of finances so complex it felt like a full-time job. But the most difficult part was explaining it to the children. How do you tell a 6-year-old that her daddy has another little boy, who is her brother? How do you tell a 12-year-old that his father has a second family? Their confusion and heartbreak were a heavier burden than any legal document. Elizabeth and I, we don't talk every day. We aren't best friends. How could we be? We are a living reminder to each other of the deepest betrayal imaginable. But there is a bond there, a grim solidarity. We are the only two people on Earth who understand the exact dimensions of this tragedy. We are co-victims of the same crime. Sometimes we text, just a few words. "How are you holding up?" Or Chloe asked about Jacob. Today, it's a connection forged in fire. And it's the only thing that feels real from that old life. The path forward is painful. There are divorces to finalize, new lives to build from the rubble. But we are walking that path now, not as rivals, but as unlikely allies. Two women, two families bound together forever by the one truth he tried to keep from us both.